journals for a minute. I know that's nobody's favorite conversation. It is the bane of students, university students everywhere. I'm sure that you're familiar with these. Perhaps you've had to use an academic journal, scholarly journal in one of your classes. If you were in my 112, I know we talked about it. Or maybe you were just sort of in the beginning of your scholarship career. You're not really up into your upper division courses, but eventually, at some point, you will have to read them and use them and write in the style of them. So they're not the most fun thing to read because they are for an academic audience, and that audience typically isn't us. There's most of the journals are not written for me, even though I am in academia. So there's a reason that we use them within the universities. Ultimately, you're going to be expected to communicate your own research or your own critical thoughts in that same kind of method. And so it behooves you at this point in your career to go on someplace like this, academic journals, A to Z, go onto databases, or even just Google, like, what are the, spelled that wrong, major academic journals in psychology, for example. And that can give you a good idea where to start. It'll pull up and you can go to one that looks right for you. But really, we should be looking at several of them. I look through academic journals a couple times a month just to see what kinds of new ideas within pedagogy are popping up. I don't really visit too many literary ones anymore, but I do sort of for fun. So academic journals are this permanent and transparent forum where you can present research. It can be scrutinized in a good way, and discussed, and it gives researchers this venue to. There's a quote I love that describes journals. Let me find it. I put it somewhere over here. There it is. Impart their knowledge to one another, contribute what they can to the grand design of improving natural knowledge and perfecting all philosophical arts and sciences. So, as I mentioned, each discipline has their dominant journals, and so what those journals look like and what the information looks like obviously differs based off of that discipline. So, the sciences, you're usually articulating research or studies that you've conducted. In business, you're articulating theories or best practices, or even just merging a lot of different sets of data together. For the humanities and religion, it's basically just like a really big research paper. And what's interesting about the differences between the sciences and humanities, let's say, so the sciences, like I said, there's lots of new findings. Most of the time, there's lots of authors. So I was doing a little bit of research, and in 93, the New England Journal of Medicine had 973 authors on one journal. And even better, in 2015, there was a journal, I forget where it's from, it was on high energy physics. I don't totally know what that means, but it had 5,154 authors. They needed 24 pages just to list all of the authors. So humanities does not work that way. Humanities, which presenting theories that are really based on a sole authorship, presented just on the individual's thoughts. And so this is basically a mega glorified version of what you already do with your bundles. You identify just a novel position, you have your idea, that thing that you've observed, you make a claim or a thesis, you acknowledge that this works within your discipline, you're saying, why this is important to the class, and then you give reasons. That's pretty much all you do in a scholarly journal for literature, and of course, or anything. And all of this is going to be different depending on whatever discourse community that you're in. And good academic writers know that we need to research previous work and draw on that. We don't just sort of read a journal and then regurgitate it. That's not really the point. We use this to build our own claims. So we take other people's ideas and we expand on them, or we apply them in a new way, and then we can make our own original argument. So nothing's like completely totally original. That's why we're referencing people, we're backing stuff up, because we're saying, look, we're part of this conversation, we're trying to offer this new perspective and link between these already established papers and ideas. So there's a quote that we use a lot to talk about journals and talk about academic conversations. Of course, conversation is our scholarship word for academic thought. So we always call it entering the conversation, and the idea is that, like, oh, this conversation began a really long time ago and it's going to continue after you too, and we're all just participating. in this conversation, and we're not going to come to the end of it and decide anything. It's just sort of popping into the room, giving your 2 cents, listening to others, refuting it, and then leaving the party. So there's this great quote by Kenneth Burke. Imagine that you enter a parlor, you come late. When you arrive, others have long preceded you, and they are engaged in heated discussion, a discussion far too heated for them to pause and tell you exactly what it's about. In fact, the discussion had already begun long before any of them got here, so that no one present is qualified to retrace you for all the steps that you had gone before. You listen for a while until you decide that you have caught the tenor of the argument, then you put in your oar. Someone answers, you answer him, another comes to your defense, another lines himself against you, either to the embarrassment or gratification of your opponent, depending on the quality of your ally's assistance. However, the discussion is interminable. The hour grows late, you must depart, and the discussion still vigorously in progress. We are going to be using, familiarizing ourselves with academic journals as we look at our three main graphic novels, Persepolis, Maus, and we're moving into Palestine next week, which I'm very excited about. Academic journals are an example of intertextuality also, because you're taking bits from one text, you're putting your own ideas in there, you're quoting other people, so intertextuality. So for this week, and the assignment's going to be in the same module, but I'm going to have you read one of the most dominant scholarly journals about Maus. So anything that you think may not qualify as something scholarly, who's written about that thing? I guarantee you somebody has. It's amazing what people elevate to the level of academic journals. And it's not just this one article. So what I'm also going to ask you to do is to just get familiar with searching for journals within this discipline. So I'm just going to move on over to our library database. And as a reminder, we pay a buttload of money for you guys to have access to this stuff. It costs money to view each of these journals, even just view it once. And people who are not affiliated with a university, like you and I, they would have to pay between $15 to or $17 to, I don't know, $130 just to view a single article. Because if you think about it, it took a lot of time to write that and research that. And it's not like it's being published and bought in Barnes & Noble. So I usually go to everything. If you know the journal you want to search for, you can go in here. But for now, I'm just going to go through everything. And I'm literally just going to put in Maus. It's a weird search history I have. We'll see how good my strained internet is today. Pretty strained. Okay. Before you go any further, because I'm like, oh my goodness gracious, Lord baby Jesus, I don't want to dig through that many journals. And I look here, I'm like, oh my gosh, already the first one is not in English. So I'm guessing, but this looks kind of interesting though. I might go back to that. I'm going to go to the side and refine my search. And I recommend doing this for any kind of journal you're looking for so that you can just condense that stuff down so that you're not into page 85 still looking for something. So we have most of the full text available, but sometimes you'll get stuck with just a teaser of one page. That's always a really hot bummer. So I do full text available. And I'm also going to choose scholarly. So these are papers that people submit either that they've written according to a prompt or a call for writing from the journal, or they're just like, look, I wrote this interesting thing, please take it. And then it goes through the process of peer review, where between 2 and 6 people who are qualified in the field read through it to proofread it and to make sure that the claims match up, that it's good enough to publish, because once it's out there, that thing kind of becomes truth and we're able to use it within an academic context. So I want scholarly journals, because there's certainly a lot of journals that are more just opinion pieces. I'm not going to bother with this, but if it's something recent, you may want to toggle. Source types, I'm also going to specify. So I don't want a book, honestly. I don't want conference. I don't want any of this stuff. And reviews are so devious. I'll think that I, found the best journal that's talking about exactly what I want. Turns out it's just a review of that book. So I want just academic journals, which is still a lot, but we've really taken it down from over 100,000. So I'm going to do one more thing because I went by subject. I'm like, what? T cells, immunotherapy, Alzheimer's. Those are not things that I am looking for. I don't know how mouse pulled up in that one, but I'm going to do graphic novels. And that's way better. 364. There's 364 scholarly journals about mouse. And so if you are doing this on your own, which I recommend you do immediately after this, looking at just getting used to just the kind of format even of titles. This is such a classic academic thing. And I was looking through some of my old grad school essays and I did the same stuff, just a fragment of a sentence and then a colon and then something that specifies the title. So we have panels and faces, segmented metaphors, and reconstituted time in Art Spiegelman's Mouse. This is from the Journal of Cultural Media Studies. And so some of these are a lot about teaching. And so I don't know if those would be super helpful for me. I want people who are making an argument about something that they've seen in mouse or a connection that they made. If I was interested in manga, maybe I could do that one. But this is a really nice place to start if, let's say, I did assign you a scholarly, research-driven paper on mouse, which is not exactly what I'm assigning. But if you're like, I don't know what to write about, sifting through your bundles, through your reading notes to look for some of your own ideas that maybe you'll find some patterns, or just jumping on here and seeing what have people written about. So maybe you're like, hey, I really like manga. And this person's argument isn't really what I want to say, but that sparks that idea of maybe I could make a connection with manga. Let's see. Graphic novel representations of the German expulsion. Next week, we're going to look at options for the paper, and you can take a historical lens. If you're really interested in this history, you don't even have to be using journals like about the graphic novel. You could use journals about, let's say, German expulsion, about Poland during that time, and start to make connections. And so if you're a little overwhelmed here, you can even qualify this more. So I'll put mouse and violence. So I know that was a big part of your reading notes of just dealing with the depiction of violence here. It'll go. There we go. This went to mass violence. So I want to search instead for mouse violence. Oh, it's going to make me do, let's see, maybe I should go to language because I'm seeing a lot in here that's Portuguese. So we'll go back to English. Tailing violence, comics, narrative, gender, and the father tale in Art Spiegelman's Mouse. That's interesting. So I'm going to click on that one. Pacific Coast Philology. I've not heard of that one. But I look at the subject terms like narratives, cartoons, violence, Holocaust, narrator, stereotypes, Nazism. Okay, cool. So a lot of people were interested in that relationship between the father and art, Vladek and art. And that also would be a fascinating thing to explore from like a psychological lens. Do I have access to this? I think I forgot to say that I wanted full text. I know this is really unpleasant to watch me deal with the search engines and stuff here. So I'm just going to go back and fix my search engines just to make sure that what I have coming up here is what I want. Oh gosh, there's a lot of subjects. I'll just do comics because I think that is... I'll just do comics. That should be fine. And Holocaust. And graphic novels. There we go. That'll at least give me... do a little filtering here. Animated comics, representation of violence. Comic books, tragic stories. Well, Eisner is American Jewish history, so that's not about mouse, but it's dealing with this idea of tragic stories. I could make that connection. Forced Confessions, Case of Art Spiegelman's Mouse, graphic novels, exploring visual culture. That's not what I want. I'll go back up to this guy, Forced Confessions. I don't really know what that is, but if I wanted to, I could download the whole the whole guy and read through it. And what I do like about literary journals is that it's not as bad as reading like a scientific scholarly journal. You don't see a lot of numbers and figures. It does read in a more narrative way, which is great. Actually, this one seems pretty simplistic to read, bringing in evidence. I saw some stuff about pills. Everyone's talking about those pills being a symbol or a motif. That's a great find. So I could read through this, and let's say that I wanted to write, like, yes, I want to write about, memories, or this I'm guessing is about just these confessions that Vladek makes. I'm like, that is actually pretty interesting that his son is kind of forcing him to relive these things that are really terrible that he did and kind of confess these, let's say, sinful things that he did. If I was going to write a paper, I wouldn't just regurgitate that. I would use this with my own argument about it. So if I look at, where's that one? This is a paper I wrote for grad school. And you'll see it definitely has the colon. It's a Palestinian, Israeli-Palestinian text. And there's a lot of like misspellings because it is all Israeli names. So if you go to my Works Cited, there's really only one. I don't even think I have anything about literature in here. So I was talking about the depiction of suicide bombers. And so I did a lot in Palestine. This is a memoir of this person. And so I was looking at sources that are like, oh, what is like the ritual with martyrdom in Palestine? I didn't know, but I was able to find an article in the Medical Anthropology Quarterly. That was helpful. Stuff just understanding Palestinian youth, collective Palestinian frustration and suicide bombings, gender and Palestinian nationalism. So I ended up finding stuff outside of literature, and that may be something you want to do as well. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just play around on here. You can look for something that directly references Mauss, or you could find something that you think would be helpful for us looking at Mauss. So maybe in your reading notes, you've been writing a lot about like the father-son relationship and you're a psych major. Maybe find a journal that talks about like sort of first generation of trauma survivors, what that relationship is like between a child and parent when that parent has gone through significant crises. I know there's stuff out there about it because I've seen it. And we're going to be talking more about scholarly journals later, but this is just a little taster of how we're going to enter into these conversations.